Welcome back to the Supercast podcast. All right, question number one. What's the first step that you use in practice to help people out who want to lose weight, but their main barrier is lack of time? I think the biggest thing first is an assessment. And I don't know, do you agree with that? Just like kind of figure out where the person is.
Yeah, my first response was take a good history with them.
Yeah.
That's usually the best first step for almost any kind of interaction like this, because there's not going to be a default intervention that you can offer to everyone, broadly speaking, who just says, I lack time. You
Yep.
need to get to know a ton more about them, their background experiences, what they've tried before, what their current time barrier is, what they
Mhm.
feel they struggle with the most. Some people might struggle most with sleep. Some people might struggle most with cravings. Some people might struggle most with actually preparing food or have multiple kids running around the house, just getting a sense of what their current circumstances are to help formulate a strategy that might be best fit for them. So history is by far where we spend the most time here.
Yeah, I mean, if in a most literal sense, the very first thing after you introduce yourself is going to be you're building a rapport, just to make sure that you have some trust that's been built there, and like a plan for a follow up, because usually this is not like a one and done type situation. But ignoring all of that, the assessment, and you said take a history, just using the term assessment, and specifically with respect to weight loss, I want to know a number of things. So, for example, what has been the person's sort of weight history as an
hmm
adult? So have they lost weight, gained weight? What's going on? What are their goals and why? Right. And then any sort of preferences about how they would go about achieving that. So, for example, if someone's like, look, I want to lose weight because I've been gaining weight as an adult and I would prefer to be leaner, and they would prefer a lower carbohydrate type approach or something like that. That would all be useful to know before you kind of go out about making recommendations. Also, I want to know, are there any sort of contraindications to active weight loss? So, for example, a disordered eating history, some sort of medical condition, or maybe weight loss would not be advised. So, if an individual is pregnant, for example, actively dealing with like a cancer diagnosis, there are a number of things, obviously, getting to the fringe there, but the assessment overall is important. And that's kind of where I start the assessment. The next part of the assessment is like, what sort of resources does this person have access to, and what opportunities do we really have to make a change? So, with respect to the diet, does this person know how to cook? Are they familiar with shopping for health promoting foods, for example? Because a person who maybe doesn't have experience in either of those two things, that would be your recommendations would be different compared to somebody who's like, oh yeah, I've tracked macros off and on for a decade, and I've done a few shows, for example. Like you're starting from a different place. The next part, diet, related to the diet, is what does their food environment look like? Meaning, particularly their microenvironments, the ones that they're able to somewhat control, maybe in the house, the workplace, stuff like that. And what sort of social support do they have? I recall a particular individual that I was coaching for a while. They like straight up purchased a year of coaching, just like from the jump, which I'm like, cool. I actually think somebody gave it to them as a gift, and I was like, well, what do you want to do? And they wanted to lose close to 100 pounds, right? And so when I think about big, monumental potential changes in somebody's life, I'm like, well, how did you get to where you're at now? And like, what are the barriers to maybe, why hasn't it just happened
hmm hmm
by default? If you want this and you're pretty motivated, what's been the holdup? Her husband was hiding like candy in virtually every place that this person spent time. So like at her desk, in her car, in the living room. So effectively, her food environment was trying to sabotage her. And I brought up the point. I was like, hey, maybe could you tell him to not do that? And she's like, absolutely not. I could not possibly do that. I'm like, well, this is going to be a challenge,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Also coached a person who was like was not a food scientist. She was like food scientist adjacent. She
Okay.
was like a taste tester for
Yeah.
cakes and pastries and stuff like that. And I was like, tough. It's very more challenging, right? So anyway, knowing that sort of stuff, what sort of opportunities do you have to modify the food environment, social support? That's important. Same thing with exercise. Is the person currently exercising, right? Because that would be another opportunity potentially to improve weight management. Are they meeting the physical activity guidelines? Are they not exercising at all? Your recommendations would differ based on that. And then same thing, when I think about large amounts of weight loss potentially being ideal for a person, uh, medications. Are they interested in them? Have they consulted a physician about them? Do they have access to them? Is it a complete no go? These are all things that you kind of walk through with the assessment, but that's kind of the first step. But none of those things are like I think what the person's asking. They're saying, no, what's the very first thing that you would actually do or recommend if somebody doesn't have a lot of time, but they want to lose weight? And I guess that brings me back to maybe my real answer to this question is I don't know that time itself is the limitation here,
Right.
because that kind of suggests that there's this like really heavy, deliberate, conscious decision making that goes around with all like food related practices. I prefer that term over behaviors. That's for another podcast, maybe. Like as far as what foods are being selected from the store, what meals are being prepared, how much people are eating, how fast they're eating, and how full they feel. Like most of these things tend to be subconscious and a lot of cultural, environmental inputs and stuff like that. So I don't know that time is the limitation here, save for a person who's like, look, I legitimately have no time to prepare food in my own home. And so therefore I have to eat the majority of my meals. They're mostly prepared outside of the home. In which case I would look for strategies to like get around that, whether it's a meal prep service, whether it's a partner helping you out, whether it's a friend helping you out, something like that. But in any case, regardless of what's going on, all roads lead to this final common pathway, which is how do we change the default dietary pattern such that the amount of energy a person is taking and the amount of calories that they're consuming more appropriately supports their goals, whether it's weight loss, weight gain, weight maintenance, or whatever. Most people, because we do have this obesity epidemic, most people's default dietary pattern, it results in too many calories being consumed. And that's mostly related to the food environment, not only at large in the community and in society, but also their microenvironments that they have some control over. So that's at the workplace, that's at home, things of that nature. So if I had to pick one thing, the one thing to change to rule them all, I would probably leverage this sort of motivation and willpower, if you want to call it that, to change the food environment to the extent it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you.
And then after that, if someone's like, look, I got rid of all the high calorie, ultra processed foods that, have added sugar and stuff in the home. Now what? I did that. What's the next step? It's like, great. How do we go about getting you to select these minimally processed foods, more often? And does that mean we have to do meal prep such that when you're in a time pinch, that you have something ready to go rather than having to like order out, for example? So yeah, I think overall, since most dietary practices occur subconsciously, we need to set a person up for success such that their default dietary pattern, how many calories they take in, the quality of the food, etc., overall supports their goals. And I think that's most easily and most efficiently sort of changed by changing the food environment. You can only go to that willpower well so often before it's dry. And then what? So, and the last thing I'll say, I know I'm ranting. We're 10 minutes into this thing. I freaking did this. People will say, well, look, bodybuilders, figure athlete, whatever, physique sort of competitors are able to manipulate their body weight very, very efficiently, over the course of 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but that's only 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever. We're talking about years. We want people to not only lose the weight, for example, but keep it off for years. And bodybuilders, by and large, are not good at that. And nor did most of them start from an excess adiposity state. That's generally not the case. They're like, yeah, I was pretty fit, had a bunch of muscle mass, decided I wanted to compete, got more muscle mass, maybe bulked, and started from there. But their default sort of body composition was not like too much adiposity. So it's just a different scenario.
Yeah, I recognize that this, very quality and detailed answer, but it might actually be less than satisfying for the question asker who's like, I don't feel like I have time. What should I do first? And I think the point that we want to underscore here is that the end state goal of like what your dietary pattern looks like, what your day-to-day looks like, it's very similar because these principles are very common in general across, all sorts of weight loss scenarios. We want to get you to that similar end state where your default diet that you have most access to, that is compatible with your lifestyle, generates the right energy balance. But the challenge is that we don't know any of the circumstances around your perceived lack of time is what I would say. And so the details of that are what matter. And so that's why our first step is getting at those details to see what strategies can we use for you, the person, to set up your lifestyle. It's not going to be as simple as, oh, this person should just do this or just do that, because that may or may not be a good fit or match for that person's situation or their perceived situation. So yeah, that's how I would put a bow on it.
Yep, love that.